The first thing that changed was the sky. People in Nairobi, Manaus, Melbourne, Reykjavik, everywhere, looked up one evening and saw displacement. Curtains of green, magenta, indigo, and gold glimmered from horizon to zenith, as though the heavens had turned into a huge cathedral window. At first there were cheers, hurried photographs, streams, and hashtags. 24 hours later, nobody could agree on what those hashtags had been. A week later, most of the world's language had become a soup of half-remembered nouns and nervously repeated filler words. Experts said the geomagnetic reversal that astronomers had forecast for decades had begun, then stalled. The poles, locked in a limbo, kept bleeding brilliant radiation into the ionosphere. The auroras never switched off, and neither did the interference in the electric coils of the human brain. Anyone could feel it. Thoughts arrived, then slipped sideways, fracturing into unrelated images. People wandered from rooms in mid-conversation, forgot which pocket held a key, argued about decisions they had emphatically agreed on seconds earlier. News anchors stared at teleprompters as though they were hieroglyphs. One by one, cities dimmed, not because power grids failed, although those too sagged under the electromagnetic racket, but because no one could maintain the rhythm of coherent work. Except, curiously, for musicians. I learned this from my sister Lyra, a concert violist who phoned me 5 days after the sky turn, sounding more lucid than I'd heard anyone sound since the world went kaleidoscopic. "Elias," she said, skipping, "hello, you need to find a steady A440. The phone line hissed like oil on cast iron. I pressed my palm over my other ear to block the apartment's creaking radiator. "Lyra, people are collapsing in the streets. Grocery stores have become barter markets." "You're talking about tuning?" "Exactly," she replied, pitch anchor's thought. The field's noise has a standing harmonic near 435 Hz. If I hold slightly above it, say 440, I can keep my cortical oscillations coherent. You can too, but you have to listen very precisely. I trusted her, partly because she was my sister, partly because my own days, since the auroras, had become gray loops. I would pick up my unfinished doctoral dissertation on mineral acoustics, then find myself staring at the paper an hour later with no memory of the interim. "Meet me in Ithaca," she continued. "Bring anything that makes a clean tone." I looked around my sublet. The piano sat mute under a blanket of staff paper drafts. My clarinet, dormant since grad school orchestra, leaned against a shelf. I thought of the bus ride, the highway snarled by driverless cars whose human operators could no longer concentrate. Then I remembered our mother, 6 months in a nursing home near Ithaca. If anyone needed clarity, it was she. "I'll come," I said. "But why Ithaca?" "Because Cornell's physics lab still has power, and because we need Cayuga's resonance." She hung up before I could dissect that cryptic statement. 3 dawns later, after sharing a train car with passengers humming scales like monks while conductors inspected tickets upside down, I stepped onto Ithaca's frozen platform. Above me, the Aurora flared. Red fountains tossed coin-bright sparks that lingered like dandelion fluff. The town was darker than I remembered. Street lights had been switched off to save power, or perhaps nobody remembered to turn them on. Yet music floated everywhere. From porches, from car windows, from the college's shuttered cafes, came guitars, trumpets, oboes, buckets banged in polyrhythm, ragged but purposeful, as if the city had reverted to an earlier epoch where information traveled solely by sound. Lyra met me outside the station, bundled in her performance blacks. Wool coat, fingerless gloves, sheet music scarf. Her eye, sharp under a sky whose glare softened every other face into forgetful wonder, fixed on the clarinet case in my hand. "You remembered E-flat," she said, approval flickering in her grin. "Good. Wider bores better for stability." "Lyra," I murmured, "tell me the plan before my memory slides." She touched her smartwatch. The faint glow pulsed a sine wave. "You have 24 minutes before your cognitive envelope decays. Let's walk and play." We marched toward the university, instruments out, sounding long notes in call and response. At first I felt foolish, like a busker intruding on dawn, But as the reed warmed, the clarinet's voice reached somewhere deeper than embarrassment. Each sustained A was a handhold hammered into mental ice. Gripping it, I climbed out of fog. Images sharpened street numbers, the smell of wet elm leaves, my sister's breathing. Explain the harmonic, said between phrases. Lyra alternated bow strokes with speech. Earth's core dynamo, she faltered, dug for an octave leap, regained footing. Every resonant system emits a spectrum. The stalled reversal has locked one overtone inside the magnetosphere. It oscillates irregularly around 435 plus or minus half a hertz. Brains, being electric gelatin, entrained to it. The mismatch between native cortical beta waves, around 1420 hertz, and that geomagnetic overtone generates beating patterns in higher cognitive circuits. Result: scrambled syntax, memory dropouts. And music counters it? Music gives us a metronome stronger than the beat interference. When we hold a stable tuning slightly above the magneto note, the brain locks to our self-chosen reference instead of the planet's glitch. We entered the arts quad. Students sat on benches with battered cellos between their knees, eyes closed as though in prayer. Near the clock tower, a pair of janitors clanged garbage can lids in steady ums. Yet somehow it organized into a rough communal hum, like sympathetic strings sharing one massive instrument. Inside Lincoln Hall, Lyra led me to a seminar room converted into a field clinic. Cots were arranged in circles. Elderly townspeople lay with earbuds in, connected to sine wave generators operated by music majors. When a patient's eyelids fluttered, a technician nudged the frequency knob to keep them balanced. I recognized Dr. Soraya Patel, my former acoustics advisor, orchestrating the procedure. "Elias," she greeted, as though we were merely between classes. "Found your way back to sanity?" Following Lyra's pitch pipe, I said, "Good, we're mapping personal thresholds. Each brain wants a micro-adjusted note, some at 436.2, some 439.7. Perfect pitch blesses us in new ways." Lyra deposited her viola on a table. "But treatment is transient. We need a planetary fix." She unfurled a campus map over a piano lid. Circles radiated from several marked sites. Here, the physics lab's giant Helmholtz coils. There, the clock tower's 21-bell chime. Beyond town, the lake's glacial basin. Arrows converged on a star drawn offshore. "I ran simulations," she said. "If we drive a counter-resonant wave into the ionosphere, amplitude matched, phase inverted, we can cancel the magnetic note locally, restore normal brain function in the bubble. Maybe give people freedom to devise a broader solution." Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting an acoustic auroral shield? We have no speakers big enough." "Not speakers," Lyra corrected. "Water. Cayuga Lake can behave as a natural subwoofer. The basin is 435 meters deep at its central trough. Coincidence I refuse to ignore. With enough synchronized boats driving transducers into the water column, we can pump a 440.5 hertz standing wave, inverted, straight into the sky. The lake's surface will lens it upward. The auroral plasma responds to electromagnetic harmonics. Modulate one, we modulate the other." I whistled, a flutter-tongued trill of doubt. "Synchronizing hundreds of vessels while people can't hold a thought? That's why we recruit musicians," she replied. "Every band in the Finger Lakes, every high school orchestra, every church organist, they can stay coherent long enough to steer." Dr. Patel exhaled. "We'll need power amplifiers the size of grain silos." Lyra tapped the map. "The agricultural college has diesel generators, and the solar car racing team hoarded lithium packs." Arguments filled the room, but they sounded like counterpoint, not discord. By dusk we had a blueprint: outfit pontoon rafts with bass shakers, drive them from shore at midnight when wind was calm, tune on cue from a master clock encoded in a flute motif broadcast over FM. I volunteered to captain one raft, steering a row of woofer cabinets scrounged from the theater department. That night I visited our mother. The nursing home radiated eerie tranquility. Caregivers hum lullabies to avoid losing themselves. Mom sat by a window, hands folded over a lap blanket, eyes reflecting the sky's impossible lights. "Elias," she said, voice thin but steady as the clarinet lines I'd warmed hours earlier. "You look taller. Did you finish your concerto?" She thought I was 12. Memory loops long preceded the sky turn, but now they had tightened. I opened the clarinet case and played her the lullaby she used to sing, a modal climbing tune. The moment the melody settled, her gaze steadied. "That one," she whispered. "I remember that one. I promised I would return tomorrow, after the lake sang." By daybreak, Cayuga looked like an armada preparing for a cross-dimensional voyage. Barges, fishing skiffs, outer university skulls each layered with plywood, bolted to inherited sound equipment, bobbed at the marina. Musicians tuned among coils of cable, some tapping tuning forks against railings, some just humming and letting the note grow inside their chests. On the main dock, Lyra conducted a rehearsal. She wielded no baton, merely her smartphone metronome and the confidence of a field marshal. 46 vessels, tagged A through D for quadrants, would follow her broadcast tone. A recorded organ note pulsing at 440.5 hertz. Volume gently warped into a slow tremolo so the brain could latch like Velcro. When Lyra raised her left hand, throttle up. When she dropped it, hold steady. When she circled both arms overhead, engage subwoofers and begin phase inversion. Simple, if you could still remember alphabet order. I climbed aboard the sloop D3, a party pontoon retrofitted with two 18-inch drivers from a defunct EDM club. My crew included Marta, a jazz bassist who kept slapping ghost notes on her upright to stay lucid, and twins named Tess and Theo, choral majors who completed each other's half-forgotten sentences. We each wore earbuds transmitting Lyra's pilot tone. Every few minutes a wave of vertigo crept behind my eyes. I tongued an A on the clarinet and the world snapped back into grid lines. At 11:50 p.m. we launched. Q-beams on shore flashed signals. The Aurora's ribbons had thickened more like marble veins, incandescent and ominous. Some predicted the stalled polarity might lurch any moment into full flip, frying electronics permanently. We had to act first. Mid-lake, the water calmed to dark glass. Over the radio, Lyra's voice counted us down. Quadrant A, spin up. B, C, D, phase lock in 3, 2, give it everything. I twisted the knob on the amplifier. A subterranean throb surged through the deck. The drivers punched into the water. I felt a shockwave in my kneecaps. Unlike audible sound, the 440.5 hertz vibration was borderline infrasonic here because of the medium's density, but the equipment compensated with amplitude. The lake answered. Ripples radiated outward like breathing. Simultaneously, the sky shimmered. Vertical rods of green snapped into crisp, ruler-straight pillars. For the first time since the sky turn, the Aurora looked geometric, not stochastic. Lyra's next command, "Invert now!" We flipped a bank of switches. The signal inverted its phase. A global, instantaneous mirror image. My inner ear tingled. The clarinet's reed buzzed sympathetically, even in silence. The effect climbed. You could see it. Everyone later swore they could. The lake's surface became a luminous node grid, as though moonlight had decided to draw longitude lines across the water. Above, the pillars folded, flattening into a sheet of iridescent slate. Then, gradually, the colors desaturated. The sky turned a pale, uniform turquoise. On deck, Marta laughed. "I just remembered every birthday I ever forgot." Tess recited a chunk of Virgil in Latin. Theo corrected her meter. I felt it too. The scrape removed from thought, like a record static cleaned. My brain stretched awake. I reviewed the last 2 weeks with startling clarity, recalled entire pages of research notes, even the equation I'd once derived linking quartz oscillations to harmonic damping. Over comms, Lyra declared, "Holding cancellation stable, 2 minutes in, but stability frayed sooner than we hoped." A stutter ran through the tone, just a fractional drop in amplitude. Yet the sky answered with widening ripples of color. Someone's generator coughed. Another boat reported a fuse blown. Without balanced output, the standing wave began to slant. You could hear interference beating across the lake like distant helicopter blades. On my pontoon, the left woofer smoked, Tess yelped. I killed channel 2, but that threw our phase off 180 degrees. Marta tossed her base on its side, ran to the edge, and plunged her handheld practice amp directly into the water, strap still around her shoulder. Better than zero, she shouted. We recovered 97% power, but we needed 100. Across the network, error tallies climbed. Elias, Lyra said over a private channel. We're losing the node. That gap will expand, the sky will tear, and people will drop back into noise. I scanned the deck. The clarinet. Wooden, open tone, air not water, but sound transmits between media. I lifted it, wetted the reed, and balanced over the railing. You can't out-vomit generator, Theo warned. I can add coherence, I replied. Closing my eyes, I inhaled, set my embouchure, and blew the strongest concert A I'd ever produced. No vibrato, no ornament, just cylindrical purity. The note cut above the subwoofers throbbed like a lighthouse beam threading fog, a miracle of physics. Water's surface imparts partial reflection and partial transmission. The acoustic energy from the clarinet spread through the air, but some portion coupled into the vibrating lake via pressure waves. More importantly, human brains on surrounding boats, magnetically sensitive lumps of tissue, locked on to the auditory beacon with evolutionary efficiency. Musicians righted their pitch, damaged amplifiers were retuned around my live tone, the interference minima tightened. Lyra's voice burst with static and relief. Holding again, don't stop, Elias. I kept playing until cheeks numbed. A's, arpeggios, cadential walks around the tonic, always returning. Others joined. Flutes, trumpets, human voices. Soon the lake resonated not with a single inverted sine, but with layered harmonic series, each precisely spaced to cancel the rogue overtone while nourishing cognition. It was not, metaphorically but literally, a symphony, engineered across water and sky. Hour by hour we sustained the field. Dawn sneaked up behind the hills as a soft gray blur, devoid of the Aurora's frenetic neon. When the sun breached the horizon, the curtains were gone. Only wisps remained, like chalk erased from a blackboard. On shore, people who had spent weeks in fog emerged, rubbing temples as though waking from anesthesia. Car horns honked in actual traffic patterns. Someone restarted the city hall clock. Back at the dock, I slumped, reed cracked, lips swollen. Lyra met me, collapsing into a hug. We created a null, she whispered. Local only, but proof of concept. Now we iterate globally. Dr. Patel joined us, brandishing sensor readouts. Cognitive indices within a 50-mile radius are near baseline. Seems your lake is our prototype giant noise-canceling headphone. We knew the silence wouldn't last forever. The field required continuous feed. If power failed completely, the magneto note would seep back. Meanwhile, somewhere in the liquid outer core, molten iron kept swirling, still undecided which pole would claim north next. But we had gained time clear, reflective time. Within that calm, governments reassembled virtual summit, guided by orchestras transmitting stabilization tracks. Supply chains for superconducting satellite coils recommenced. Children learned fractions by clapping polyrhythms. Every public building installed tuning stations where citizens could tune a printed pitch, recalibrating their minds. Mom improved. During my next visit, she greeted me with present tense, misplacing only the year. It's beautiful, she said, pointing to the sky, now an ordinary blue, but part of me misses the colors. I thought about that murmur of nostalgia rolling across the planet. The auroras had been terrifying, yet also awe-inspiring, an accidental gift that reminded us our brains at their core were musical instruments forever at risk of falling out of tune. We survived by rediscovering that fact. I went back to Cornell to help design the next phase: orbital sound projectors, crust-embedded vibrational arrays, moon-bounce chorales. But sometimes, late at night, I drove to the lake, sat on the dock with my clarinet, and played against the quiet water. The note faded outward in concentric rings, and I imagined it rising to meet the magnetosphere, not to cancel this time, but to converse. Two frequencies bending, searching, then finally nesting one atop the other like perfect fifths, resolving to a major chord. A stalled flip, a flawed planet, a messy species. We would not always realign so neatly. Still, as long as someone somewhere remembered to keep time, to breathe the opening pitch, to listen for the secret harmonies under the roar of cosmic static, thought would find its shape again.